My name is Nina Callahan. When I was a child, they gave me the room no one wanted by the pipes by the mildew. They said I was the strong one, so I learned to be silent. I paid for groceries when Dad lost his job and babysat Samantha through every storm. I thought loyalty would earn me love. Instead, on her 30th birthday, she screamed, "Get out." My mother laughed. My father turned away. I walked out in heels I had worn for them. And the very next morning, I stepped barefoot into my own oceanfront mansion in Malibu worth $30 million paid in full. They still don't know where I went, but they will, because I kept the receipts. And I turned silence into stone. The room to the left of the staircase was always mine. It wasn't really a bedroom. More like a storage nook someone had cleared out and tossed a mattress into. The walls were yellowed from humidity, and one of them had a crack that started near the ceiling and split all the way down like a scar. In winter, the radiator clanked so loud it sounded like it was screaming. In summer, the fan just pushed around hot air that smelled like wet plaster. But still, Mom insisted it was cozy like a reading corner in a fairy tale. Samantha got the big room upstairs. 2 windows, both east-facing, so the sun kissed her awake every morning. She had a vanity, lace curtains, and posters of pop stars who looked nothing like us. I wasn't jealous. Not then. I was tired. Tired of asking and getting half smiles. Tired of hearing, "You're the strong one, Nina." Like that meant I didn't get to want anything. From as early as I can remember, I was the one who knew where the Band-Aids were. I was the one who walked to the pharmacy when Mom had a headache. I was the one who had to miss school if Samantha had the flu. She'd curl up on the couch swaddled like a baby bird while I wiped her forehead and carried the trash out. And if I got sick, "Well, you'll bounce back, sweetheart," Mom would say, already checking her phone. Once when I was about 12, I asked Dad if we could trade rooms. Just for the summer. He looked up from his newspaper and said, "Your sister's room has stairs. You want her falling down and breaking something." That was the end of it. No discussion, no compromise. My safety didn't seem to factor in when I tripped over the basement stairs carrying the laundry basket a week later. I got straight A's. Every report card, every quarter. I volunteered at the library. I helped Mrs. Espinoza next door with groceries when her arthritis flared up. No one told me to. It just felt like what I was supposed to do. I thought maybe if I was good enough I'd finally earn a place that felt like mine. Then came senior year. I'd spent the entire summer in the community center library prepping for my college applications. I wanted engineering. I loved machines. I loved the logic of it, the way things fit together if you just studied hard enough. People didn't work like that, but blueprints did. When the Caltech acceptance arrived, I didn't open it right away. I held the envelope in my lap, breathing like something fragile lived inside it. When I finally tore it open and saw the words, "Full Scholarship," I pressed the letter to my chest and laughed. A full ride. California. My life was about to begin. That night at dinner, I waited until Samantha finished telling the story of her choir solo. She had everyone's attention, even Dad's, who rarely looked up from his plate. When the room finally quieted, I said it softly. "I got into Caltech. Full scholarship." Silence. A full second of silence. Then Mom blinked. "California. That's really far, baby." Dad grunted. "Is that the one in LA? Pasadena," I corrected. Mom wiped her hands with her napkin. "Well, I guess you'll have to figure out your housing and all that. We can't help with flights." "I don't need help. It's all covered." Samantha stabbed a green bean. "So you're just leaving?" "I'm going to college." "You're leaving me," she said. And that was the moment. Not the letter. Not the scholarship. That moment when she made it about her. When Mom reached over and touched her wrist and said, "She's not leaving you, sweetie. We'll figure it out." I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I nodded, excused myself, and walked outside. There was no party. No cake. No congratulations banner. I packed my things in silence over the next 2 months. My room didn't take long. Most of my stuff fit in 2 suitcases and a laundry bag. Samantha cried when I rolled them into the hallway. She told me I was selfish, that the house would feel wrong without me. That mom was already overwhelmed, but she didn't offer to help pack. The morning I left, Mom handed me a packed lunch, turkey sandwich, no mustard, just how I liked it, but her face was tight. Like she was holding back 100 things. She kissed my cheek. Dad honked from the driveway. He wouldn't be getting out of the car. He said he was in a hurry. When I walked down the steps and looked back, Samantha stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. "You think you're better than us now?" she asked. I didn't answer. Not then. The drive to the airport was quiet. Dad dropped me off at departures without turning off the engine. I hugged my duffel bag and stepped onto the curb as he pulled away. No wave, no goodbye. I flew across the country with a heart full of grief and hope tangled together like wire. In Pasadena, the air was dry and the sidewalks smelled like jasmine in the mornings. My dorm room was tiny, but it had a window and sunlight poured in like a promise. For the first time in my life, the space around me belonged to me. But even then, late at night, I'd sometimes reach for my phone. I'd scroll through old texts, check voicemails I never returned. I kept my number the same for years. Part of me believed someone would call. That one day they'd say the words I always wanted to hear. "We see you, Nina. We're proud." But the phone stayed silent. And so did I. I filled my days with textbooks, code, and cheap coffee. At the University of California, San Diego, I felt like I had finally stepped into a life that didn't demand I apologize for existing. No one there knew I came from a family where silence was louder than praise. No one knew I used to sleep in a damp room beside a staircase. They just saw me. A mechanical mind. A quiet girl with sharp logic. And in those classrooms and labs, that was enough. I worked part-time at a campus library to cover expenses the scholarship didn't. Nights were long, and I often fell asleep with my laptop still warm beside me. But it was a good kind of exhaustion, the kind that felt like movement. Like maybe, just maybe, I was building something real. In my junior year, I landed a summer internship at a small software company in Solana Beach. It was modest, run out of an office that used to be a surf shop with whiteboards on every wall and beanbags no one ever used. The team was lean, young, hungry. I was just another intern until I met Julian Wolf. He was the lead developer, about 5 years older than me, with permanently rumpled hair and a worn denim jacket he wore even in July. The first time I presented a solution at the Monday stand-up, he didn't say "nice job" like others did out of politeness. He asked to see my code. Then he called me into his cubicle later to ask how I'd thought through the algorithm. Most people nodded at the results. Julian cared about the thinking behind it. We stayed late some nights going through lines of logic like puzzle pieces. He pushed me. Not because he doubted me, but because he didn't. For the first time, someone looked at my brain like it was a muscle worth strengthening. That fall, I turned down 2 return offers to stay in San Diego and continue working part-time for Julian's team. I didn't tell my family. By the time I graduated, I'd already been promoted to junior developer. The company was expanding into fintech, and I floated an idea during lunch one day. A simple, streamlined app that could help hourly wage workers track income, automate bill payments, and reduce overdraft fees. Julian didn't laugh. He leaned forward, eyes focused. "Tell me more." Within 4 months, we quit our jobs and filed an LLC. We worked out of my apartment for the first 6 weeks, surviving on ramen and instant oatmeal. The apartment was small with mismatched furniture and a busted heater, but it had a wide table by the window where we set up our monitors. We named the app Budget Bridge. Julian handled the back end while I obsessed over UX. We launched a beta within 7 months. By then, we'd gotten small funding from a local startup incubator. It wasn't much, just enough to stop eating cup noodles every night. The first time we hit 10,000 downloads, we celebrated with $2 tacos from a truck on Garnet Avenue. Julian raised his can of lime soda like it was champagne. To people on the outside, we were just another pair of 20-somethings chasing a dream. But to me, it was the first time I'd created something that felt mine. One evening, maybe a year in, I was fixing a bug when my phone buzzed. It was my mother. I hesitated. The last time we'd spoken, she spent 20 minutes describing Samantha's new title on a local advisory board. She hadn't asked what I was doing or how. Just said your sister's doing well. Still, I picked up. Mom launched right in. Samantha got featured in the newsletter. Isn't that something? I said nothing. Then she asked if I was still working at that little company. I almost corrected her. Almost told her I was the CEO now that I'd signed our first investor agreement last week, that our user base had grown by 30% in 2 months. But I stopped myself. She wouldn't hear it, so I said yes. Still working. She hummed like that was good enough, then added Samantha might come down to San Diego next month. Maybe you two can meet up. I said sure. After we hung up, I stared at the black screen of my phone for a long time. Julian walked in with 2 coffees. You good? Yeah. Just family stuff. He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. Julian didn't ask much about my past. He never pried. But one night during a thunderstorm, we sat on the fire escape watching water rush down the alley, and he said something I never forgot. Sometimes when the people who are supposed to love you the most don't see you, you start building mirrors in your mind. You keep looking for yourself in their reflection and you never find it. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. In the second year, we moved into a shared workspace in downtown San Diego. It wasn't fancy, but it had sunlight and a coffee machine that worked half the time. We hired our first designer, a friend of Julian's from college, then a customer support lead, then a junior dev. Budget Bridge crossed 100,000 users by spring. But still, I didn't tell my family. Not about the app, not about the seed funding. Not even when we were featured in a financial literacy column in a national magazine. I watched from a distance as Samantha posted her brunches and yoga retreats. Every now and then, I'd get a forwarded email from Mom about a local fundraiser or her church bake sale. There was always some mention of Samantha at the end. I'd reply with a short note. Glad to hear things are going well. It became our routine. They lived in a world where Samantha was the center. I had accepted that. Until the world I was building started to cast its own gravity, and people started to notice. Not the ones I had waited years to hear from, but the right ones. They were startup scouts, small business grant officers, even a few curious journalists who called me Miss Callahan instead of just Nina. It felt strange and affirming all at once. Our growth was modest but real. Every week brought a few more users, a few more reviews, a few more reasons to keep going. But then the numbers plateaued. Then they dropped. Customer feedback became harsher, not because we failed to deliver the basics, but because our competitors had begun doing more, and faster. Our little team worked hard, but we didn't have the budget for flashy features or expensive partnerships. What we had was vision. What we lacked was time. A year and a half after our official launch, one of our seed investors requested a meeting. I walked in with a binder of charts, projections, and a hopeful heart. I walked out with a deadline. If we didn't show significant user growth in the next 60 days, they were pulling out. I remember standing on the sidewalk outside that office in La Jolla, the ocean breeze so gentle it almost felt like pity. Julian wasn't in that meeting. He said he had another call. A pitch deck for a possible Series A. I didn't think much of it then. That week, I didn't sleep much. I ran A/B tests on our onboarding flow, redesigned parts of the dashboard, even rewrote our help center pages to sound warmer. Our team followed my lead, but the energy was tight. Like we all felt something approaching, and no one wanted to say it out loud. Then on a quiet Thursday morning, I opened our company email and found a thread I wasn't supposed to see. It was forwarded to me by accident. Or maybe not. The subject line said term sheet review, Brightline FinTech. My breath caught. I read the body 3 times. Julian had signed on with one of our closest competitors. A slick, overfunded platform that had approached us 6 months earlier about a merger. We had declined, he hadn't. There was no resignation note, no conversation. Just a name on a contract and a dotted signature that no longer belonged to my co-founder. I stared at my screen until the cursor stopped blinking. Then I closed the laptop and walked out of the co-working space. No one noticed. Over the next 2 weeks, things unraveled quickly. Our investor followed through on the exit. A second one did the same. We couldn't meet payroll for the next month. I held a team meeting in the kitchen next to the broken coffee machine and told everyone the truth. No tears. Just facts. I offered to help each of them find other jobs. Wrote recommendations. Sent intro emails. I cleaned out my desk last. Left the orchid Julian gave me on the windowsill. It had died weeks ago. That final night, I stayed until past midnight. The office had been quiet for days, but that night it felt truly empty. Not just in space, but in spirit. I packed the last of our files, unplugged the monitors, and pulled the whiteboard calendar off the wall. There was a date circled in red, our projected milestone for 1 million users. I smiled at it. A small, tired smile. Then I reached for the screwdriver and removed the budget bridge sign from the glass door. It came off with a small cracking sound. Not dramatic, just real. I sat cross-legged on the floor, the sign resting against my knees, and let myself feel it. The failure. The end of something that once made me feel invincible. Outside, a few cars passed on Broadway. Somewhere someone was ordering fries at the 24-hour diner across the street. Life moved. I booked an Uber. The driver didn't speak. He played soft jazz and I looked out the window the entire ride back. San Diego passed by in muted shades like it knew I needed stillness. When I got home, I didn't unpack the boxes. Instead, I opened a fresh notebook. No branding, no pitch. Just ideas. Lines began forming. Arrows. Questions. I sketched out problems I still believed in solving. Not with big promises or press releases, but with something quieter, smarter, resilient. Julian was gone. The team was gone. But I was still here, and this time I wasn't going to tell anyone. Not yet. Not until the product spoke for itself. Not until the walls were built. Not until I had my own kind of gravity again. I closed the notebook. The night was quiet. And I was still the last one leaving the office. Even if that office was now a one-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and a desk too small for dreaming. But I was going to dream anyway. I started waking up at 5 every morning. Not because I wanted to, but because my mind wouldn't let me sleep. Ideas poured in messy and loud, and I'd catch them on sticky notes, napkins, the back of grocery receipts. I was afraid if I didn't, they'd vanish just like Budget Bridge had. At first, it was all theory. I tested algorithms in my apartment, coded late at night while the downstairs neighbor practiced trumpet. I knew what I wanted, this time a financial platform that didn't shame people for being broke, that adapted to them like a good friend would. I called it Lantern. Not officially. Not yet. Just a word scribbled across a page. But it felt right. Warm. Steady. Like something people would trust. I didn't want a co-founder this time. No board seats handed out for friendship. No face of the company to smile on stage while I rewrote every back-end process alone. Still, I knew I couldn't do it completely solo. I needed a team. Small, sharp, quiet. I found Rachel first. A machine learning engineer who had left a major bank after watching her predictive models get watered down by marketing. Then Marcus, a compliance expert who hated bureaucracy but loved clarity. We were awed together, meeting in borrowed conference rooms and dingy coffee shops around San Jose. But we moved fast. Faster than I ever had before. And this time I didn't list myself as CEO. I didn't take interviews. I didn't put my name on press releases. Rachel became the public face. She didn't want it either at first, but she understood. She said the tech should lead, not the egos. And she didn't mind taking a little heat while I worked behind the curtain. We launched the beta quietly 6 months in. No fanfare. Just a waiting list and a promise to listen. Users trickled in, curious and cautious. We answered every message ourselves. We fixed bugs in real time. And when someone wrote, "This actually helped me save for my daughter's braces," I sat down and cried in the kitchen. We got traction, grants, mentions in industry newsletters. Venture capital sniffed around, but we weren't ready. Not until the code felt bulletproof. Not until the model learned without bias. 2.5 years in, we filed for a patent on our AI engine. I signed it with my full legal name tucked into a line of technical authorship. No titles. Just initials. At a fintech summit in San Francisco, we were invited to demo. Rachel would present. I would watch from the audience like just another data scientist with a lanyard and tired eyes. The conference hall was sleek and unforgiving, full of people who said things like exit strategy and vision alignment over $10 coffees. Our booth was small. A single monitor looping lanterns interface and a bowl of mints we forgot to refill. Rachel stood tall. Confident but real. She didn't oversell. She walked through our origin, our philosophy, and then the machine itself. No magic, just math done right. When the Q&A opened, a man in a pinstripe blazer raised his hand. He didn't introduce himself. Just said, "Who's the architect behind the lantern logic grid?" Rachel glanced at me. I shook my head just barely. She smiled and said, "We're a collaborative team." The man smirked. Funny because the patent filing lists N. as the lead contributor. A ripple went through the room. I felt my hands clench in my pockets. Rachel didn't flinch. "Yes," she said. "That's correct. Is she here?" he asked, scanning the rows. I stayed seated. Another investor whispered something to his colleague. I caught the word stealth. Rachel changed the subject. She always had timing. She pulled the screen to show Lantern's real-time adjustment tool, and the crowd leaned forward again. The moment passed, but I felt its weight. Afterward, in the hallway, Rachel handed me a bottle of water. "You okay?" I nodded. He wasn't wrong, but I'm not ready to be public. "You don't owe them a name," she said. "You built something better than that." That night, I walked the Embarcadero alone. The lights from the Bay Bridge shimmered like scattered ideas I hadn't caught yet. I stopped at a bench and sat thinking about everything I had given up. The recognition. The applause. Even my own name. But I didn't feel regret. Lantern was growing. Our users trusted us. Our model worked. And my name buried in legal code and invisible strings was enough. I didn't need a spotlight. I needed freedom. Freedom from being compared to Samantha. Freedom from the weight of firstborn responsibility. Freedom to build without being dismissed. As I headed back to the hotel, I passed a bookstore with a display that read, "The Stories That Shape Us." And I thought not every story needs a cover photo. Some just need to be told in the right language. Quietly, accurately, authentically. The next morning we got our first offer to acquire. And we didn't say yes. Not yet. I hadn't been back to Austin in over a decade. Not for holidays, not for birthdays, not even when Mom had a minor stroke 2 years ago. She'd texted me after the hospital discharged her, not during. That was our rhythm now. Distance and delay. The invitation came in a cream envelope addressed in Samantha's tidy cursive. Inside, a glossy card read, "Join us to celebrate Samantha's 30th birthday." There was a photo of her on the back, smiling in a blue silk dress, wine glass raised. Mom had added a note in blue ink. "Hope you can make it home, Nina." She still wrote the word home like it belonged to all of us. I almost threw it away. But then I didn't. I bought a bottle of Cabernet from a local vineyard outside Santa Rosa, one that wasn't sold in stores. And from a dusty box in my closet, I pulled out an old painting Mom used to love. A watercolor landscape with gold reeds by a lake, the kind she'd said reminded her of Vermont even though we'd never been. When I landed at Austin Bergstrom, the humidity hit like a wall. I stood on the curb gripping the neck of the wine bottle through a paper bag and waited for a rideshare. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Visiting family?" he asked. I nodded. The house looked the same. Blue shutters, gravel driveway, wind chimes that always tangled in each other. Balloons were tied to the porch rail. Inside, people laughed in bursts, the kind that followed champagne and easy privilege. I knocked. Dad opened the door. He stared for a moment too long, like seeing me required translation. "You came," he said. I held up the wine and the painting. Figured she had enough candles. He chuckled. Not warm but not cold either. Just unsure. Inside, the living room pulsed with music and the scent of catered hors d'oeuvres. Samantha stood near the fireplace wearing a white dress like she was renewing vows with herself. People swirled around her, orbiting like she was gravity. Mom approached with a practiced smile. "You look Well, so do you. I handed her the painting. She blinked then smiled for real. You kept this? I nodded. I remember you loved it. She squeezed my hand briefly then turned to greet someone else. That was the most affection we'd exchanged since I was 20. I stayed near the hallway for a while, sipping my wine slowly watching from the periphery. A few cousins waved. Aunt Janice asked if I was still doing tech things. I said yes and left it at that. Dinner was set in the backyard under string lights. I found a seat at the far end of the long table. Samantha made a speech about growing older, finding your path, and knowing who your real friends were. Then the toast started. When it came to Mom's turn, she raised her glass and said, "To my beautiful girl who's never stopped making us proud." Dad followed. "You've always been the light in this family." I sipped my wine. Then Samantha stood again, holding her glass with both hands like she was at a wedding reception. And let's not forget my big sister Nina, who disappeared for a while. She grinned. "Seriously, where did you go, witness protection?" A few guests chuckled. "No headlines, no interviews, no TED Talks. I mean, did you get abducted by monks?" I set my glass down carefully. Samantha's voice rose. "Come on, Nina. Share something. Remind us you exist." I pushed my chair back. The gravel shifted beneath my heels. Samantha blinked. "What if you can't be part of the celebration? Maybe you shouldn't be here." I didn't answer. I turned toward the gate. Behind me she snapped, "Get out." The words hit me like a slap. But what stung more was the silence from the rest of the table. Then Mom laughed. Not cruelly. Just lightly, like someone brushing off static. Dad smirked into his wine. "Get out," Samantha said again, louder this time, as if the first time hadn't landed enough. So, I walked. The gravel crunched, the wind chimes clattered above the porch. No one followed. I didn't slam the gate. I didn't need to. The echo of her voice, of their laughter tucked under napkins and half-empty glasses, stayed with me longer than any door ever could. At the curb, I opened the rideshare app. The screen flickered for a moment before loading. I realized my hands were shaking, not from anger but from something quieter. Disbelief, maybe. Or the weight of an answer I had known for years but kept hoping would change. A car pulled up. I got in. The driver didn't speak. I didn't either. We passed the sign for the highway, then the airport exit. I glanced down and noticed I still had the wine bottle. Unopened. I considered leaving it on a bench, but instead I cradled it in my lap. It deserved better company. I didn't check into the hotel. I didn't even bother canceling the reservation. At the airport curb, I pulled out my phone and changed my flight. Red-eye to LAX. I didn't want room service or fresh linens or a view of the Austin skyline. I wanted out. The plane was nearly empty. I took a window seat and watched the lights shrink behind me. Somewhere in that city, my parents were probably loading the dishwasher. Samantha was still the star of her own party. No one would notice I was gone until someone realized the wine bottle never got opened. We landed just before sunrise. Los Angeles was hazy, the light soft and gold. I picked up my small suitcase, still packed with clothes I hadn't worn, gifts I hadn't given, and walked through the terminal without stopping. Outside, the air was cooler, salted faintly by the ocean. The car I'd arranged months ago was already waiting. I got in and the driver greeted me by name. "Good morning, Miss Callahan." I nodded and looked out the window. The traffic was light. We passed through Pacific Palisades, then wound up the coastal road toward Malibu. The sky was turning pink now, and the ocean below shimmered like glass. The mansion sat at the end of a quiet cliffside road, its gates tall and black and silent. No neighbors visible. Just sand, surf, and a horizon that belonged to no one. The driver parked and helped with my bag. I thanked him, then stood alone at the front steps as the gates closed behind me. I entered the code. The door clicked open with a soft mechanical sound. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it during the inspection. Marble floors, pale oak staircase, floor-to-ceiling windows that faced the ocean. It smelled faintly of wood polish and new beginnings. I set the suitcase down and walked barefoot through the hallway, trailing my fingers along the wall. I ended up in the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. The silence was deep but not heavy. It didn't press down on me the way silence used to in shared spaces filled with judgment. This was a different kind, a clean kind. I opened the doors to the terrace. The wind lifted my hair gently. Below, waves rolled in slow and steady. Gulls circled above unbothered. I leaned against the railing, my fingers cool against the stone, and watched the horizon for a long time. The sale had been in motion for 6 months. The offer was placed through a private firm. The funds came from the Lantern acquisition, carefully structured so no part of the public deal included my name. It was all legal. All quiet. Lantern's buyout had gone through without fanfare. The announcement listed the acquiring company, their new product suite, and a few placeholder names from the new executive team. I wasn't mentioned once. Just a footnote in the patent line proprietary AI framework authored by N. Callahan. That was enough. My lawyer had called me the week before. "It's done," he said. "Wire complete. You're now the sole owner of the Malibu property." I hadn't told anyone. Not my team, not old friends. Certainly not family. Back inside, I wandered through the rooms. The office had built-in bookshelves still empty. The bedroom windows faced the sea. In the walk-in closet, the light turned on, automatically illuminating polished shelves and empty hangers. It didn't feel like a void, it felt like a promise. I walked back downstairs and sat in the living room. The couch was soft, neutral beige, the kind of comfort that didn't call attention to itself. I pulled the blanket over my legs and just sat. No laptop, no whiteboard, no planning, just stillness. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to explain myself, not to a team, not to a partner, not to a parent wondering what I did for a living. No press to charm. No investors to convince. No man to validate me. Just me and this space I had built with silence and persistence. I closed my eyes. Not to sleep. Just to listen. The wind, the ocean, the faint creak of the house settling. It all sounded like breathing. I thought of the painting I'd brought to Austin. How Mom had smiled briefly like a memory had touched her. Then how quickly she turned away. How easily Samantha had pulled the attention back like she always did. Here there was no one to pull anything away. I opened my eyes and looked around again. The sunlight had shifted. The living room was now washed in gold. The shadows were soft. Nothing sharp. Nothing rushed. I stood up and walked to the piano. It had come with the house. I'd never learned to play. I lifted the cover and touched one of the keys. The note echoed gently, then faded. I pressed another. Then another. No melody. Just sound. I didn't need to fill the house with noise. I just needed to know it was mine. The email came on a Thursday morning. Subject line: strategic collaboration opportunity. I almost deleted it without reading. But the sender's name stopped me. Samantha Callahan. She had used her personal email, not her PR firm's. That told me something already. I opened it. Dear Lantern team. I'm reaching out to explore a potential brand collaboration. As you may know, my recent media presence has experienced a temporary dip due to false accusations by a few misinformed clients. I'm working with advisors to rebuild and am seeking innovative partnerships that align with wellness, financial clarity, and digital empowerment. Your platform has caught my attention, and I'd love to connect with the founder directly. Warmly, Samantha. No last name, as if I might not recognize it. No mention of what the accusations were. No hint that she had ever screamed at her sister in front of a room full of people and slammed the door behind her. I didn't forward it. I replied myself. Thank you for your interest. We've passed your request to the relevant department. If there's alignment, someone will be in touch. No name, no sign-off. Just the words. I stared at the screen for a while after sending it. Not because I second-guessed it, just because it felt like something final had closed and there wasn't even a sound. Later that day, my operations director flagged the request in our internal system. You want me to respond officially or let it drop? Let it drop, I typed. By Monday, the story broke wider. A boutique fitness chain in Denver posted a formal complaint on Instagram. Samantha had hosted 3 sold-out workshops and promised a follow-up series with personal coaching access. Payment had been upfront. The follow-up never came. Emails were ignored, refunds stalled. One of the co-owners tagged half a dozen industry pages, then Lantern. I didn't respond. Our team flagged the post and monitored it. Samantha's name started trending again. This time not with champagne and rose petals. I watched from the patio laptop, open sea breeze in my hair, the fire pit crackling faintly beside me. My name was nowhere in the mix. Not yet. Then came the podcast. It was a quiet little show. Not one of the big tech profiles. Just a niche voice in the innovation space. A 30-minute interview with someone called NC, listed only as a founding engineer behind Lantern. I hadn't authorized it, but the voice was mine. It was clipped from an old internal panel I'd agreed to speak at months ago, meant for team onboarding. Someone had leaked it. In the clip, I was asked what motivated me to build Lantern. I said sometimes when you're told enough times that you don't belong at the table, you stop asking for a seat. You build a different room. And you don't hang a nameplate. The host asked, "Have you ever been underestimated?" I laughed softly in the audio. My own family thought I was wasting time. Someone once asked me if I even knew what a spreadsheet formula was. That was the moment I started designing the engine. The episode got shared on Reddit. Then Twitter. Then LinkedIn. People connected the dots faster than I expected. Someone dug up my thesis from Carnegie Mellon. Another found my early design patent filed under N. Callahan. Screenshots of Samantha's birthday party surfaced again. The comment sections started to merge. Wait. Is this her sister? Didn't she get screamed at in that viral birthday video? I didn't log on to comment. I didn't tell my team to take anything down. I just sat in the reading nook by the upstairs window, barefoot, sipping coffee, while the internet pieced together my name from fragments I'd never given them directly. That weekend, someone messaged our public contact form asking for confirmation. Are you related to Samantha Callahan? Please comment on her current scandal. We archived the message. My phone buzzed later that night. An unknown number. I let it ring. Then it rang again. Same number. I answered on the 3rd try. Nina. Her voice was quiet. Shaken. She didn't say who she was, but she didn't need to. Hi, Samantha. There was a pause. I could hear traffic in the background. Or maybe wind. Is this true? She asked. That you're the one behind Lantern? Another pause. Then, like she had swallowed something bitter. Why didn't you ever say anything? I didn't answer. I let the silence stretch out until it folded in on itself. You let me walk into that room, she continued, thinking I was the only Callahan worth watching, and the whole time, her voice cracked. They're saying you knew everything. That you planned it. I stood by the window. The moon was full, casting a silver line across the water. I didn't plan the scandal, Samantha, I said calmly. But I did build the thing that works. And I stayed quiet while it grew. She didn't speak. Just one long breath, then the click of the call ending. I stood there a while longer. The screen went dark. The house was quiet again. Below, the ocean moved like it always did. Without permission. Without apology. The next morning my phone rang just as I was folding laundry. I didn't recognize the number, but something in my chest already knew who it was. I answered, pressing the phone between my shoulder and ear. Nina, came the voice. It was my mother. There was no greeting, no pause. Just tension so tight it almost cracked through the line. So is this how you get back at us? I didn't respond right away. I kept folding. A soft cotton sweater, the sleeves falling into each other like quiet arms. I'm not getting back at anyone, I said. I'm just living my life. She scoffed. You knew what that podcast would do. The way you let them connect the dots. You could have stopped it. No, I said gently. I didn't start the fire, I just didn't put it out for you. She didn't like that. I heard her sharp inhale. You think you're above this family now? No, I said. I think I outgrew the idea that family means staying silent while being stepped on. She went quiet. I imagined her pacing in that kitchen back in Austin, the same place where I had watched her laugh while Samantha mocked me. "What do you want from us?" she finally asked, lower this time. "I want nothing," I said. "And that's what makes this hard for you, isn't it?" There was a click. She had hung up. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. The folded sweater slid off my lap onto the floor, but I didn't pick it up. I wasn't angry, just empty. Like there was supposed to be grief, but it had already dried up somewhere along the way. That night, I made tea and sat by the window. The waves below rolled in steady as always. I tried to remember what her hugs used to feel like when I was little. But all I could recall was the way she used to brush Samantha's hair with gentle hands while mine was always in a quick, distracted braid. I didn't expect to hear from my father. But a week later, an envelope arrived. No return address. Handwritten in stiff black ink. I recognized the uneven cursive before I opened it. Inside was a birthday card. Cheap cardstock with a glittery floral design. The kind you'd find at a drugstore checkout. "Happy birthday, Nina," it said. Nina. Not Nina. I stared at it for a long time. Not because the name was wrong, but because I knew it wasn't a typo. That was the nickname he used for the neighbor's daughter when we were kids. The one with the straight A's and tennis trophies. The one he always compared me to. I didn't open the rest of the card. I slid it back into the envelope and walked upstairs to my office. There in the second drawer of my desk, beneath the deed to the Malibu property, I placed the card gently. Then I closed the drawer. Some part of me wanted to believe that gesture still meant something. That a misspelled name and a glittery card were his version of reaching out. But the rest of me knew better. I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I just looked around the room. At the shelves lined with prototypes. At the framed article from the day Lantern went live. At the small glass globe on my desk that lit up when I tapped at a gift from my lead engineer after our Series B closed. There were no photos of family. There was one, though, of a younger me about 16 standing at a robotics competition with oil on my cheek and a soldering iron in my hand. I was grinning. Alone in the frame. I remember thinking that day that maybe I'd done something they'd finally be proud of. But when I got home, no one asked how it went. I tapped the glass globe once, and it glowed faintly blue. Just enough light to make the shadows pull back. The next morning, I got an email from an old college professor. He'd read the articles, heard the clip, told me he'd always known I had it in me, that he wished I'd stayed in touch. It was kind, and I wrote back. But it didn't land the way it might have once. That afternoon, I went for a walk along the bluff trail that curved behind my property. The path was narrow but steady, with wildflowers brushing my calves and sea spray lingering in the air. At the edge, I stopped. From there, I could see the coastline stretch into forever, the cliffs like folded paper at the edge of the world. I stood there a while, letting the wind knot my hair, feeling the ache of things that had unraveled long before I noticed. Eventually, I turned back. The house came into view slowly, like a secret revealed only to those who waited. Inside, my assistant had left a note on the kitchen counter. A new podcast invite. 3 investor inquiries. And a handwritten letter addressed simply to founder. I didn't open it. I made myself a simple dinner. Grilled fish, lemon, a small arugula salad. I poured a glass of wine. Not to celebrate, just to mark the moment. Later, as the sun dipped low, I opened the balcony doors and let the air fill the rooms. The silence wasn't cold anymore. It was mine. Of all the outcomes I had imagined, watching Samantha cry on national television wasn't one of them. I had just come in from a morning swim, hair still damp, robe tied loosely at the waist when the clip started circulating. It was a crisis interview on a weekday news show. She sat rigidly on a beige studio couch, her makeup struggling to hold against the tears that seemed carefully timed. I didn't reach for the remote. I let it play. The host asked about the recent controversy, late payments to clients, a lawsuit pending in Delaware, her name being removed from a speakers list at a leadership summit in Chicago. And then came the pivot. "There's been talk about your sister," the host said cautiously. "The real founder of Lantern." Samantha inhaled sharply. Her voice trembled, but I could tell the emotion was more performance than pain. She said, "I've always supported my sister, even when she resented me. Even when she disappeared, I never turned my back on her." Then she looked into the camera as if rehearsed. She said I didn't ask for this to go public. I was betrayed. I didn't flinch. But social media did. Within hours, clips from our family's past resurfaced. Someone had found an old Instagram story from the birthday party. A guest had been filming the cake when Samantha's voice cut through the room loud and shrill. "Get out," and then came the laughter. The camera panned our mother, sipping wine, our father, smirking, Samantha glowing in the center like a star. No one had noticed me in the background, standing still holding my coat, lips pressed tight. But now they noticed. Reddit threads popped up. A TikTok creator did a full deep dive on our family's dynamic, overlaying Samantha's public statements with the birthday footage. One comment stood out. She didn't push her sister out, she erased her. The backlash spread faster than wildfire in a Santa Ana wind. By noon, 2 of Samantha's major brand partnerships had issued statements ending their contracts. By evening, her name was quietly removed from the advisory board of a nonprofit she co-founded. She posted a message on her personal account thanking her followers for their support and saying that the internet didn't know the full story. But the problem was they knew enough. The next day, my phone rang. It was a number from Austin. I didn't answer. A voicemail came through. "Nina, it's me. Samantha. Please. I didn't know how far this would go. Call me back. Please." I didn't call back. Instead, I met with Lainey, my head of partnerships at Lantern, and approved a new round of hiring for our ethics review team. We were expanding. Quietly, solidly. The acquisition funds from Grayson Capital had cleared 2 weeks earlier, and the Malibu house was only the beginning. Still, the past lingered. That night, I opened the drawer in my bedroom where the unopened birthday card from my father still sat. I looked at the envelope again, my name misspelled. Nina. I thought about how easy it was for them to misplace me, to mislabel me, to laugh when I was shoved out of the frame. Now Samantha was the one out of frame. She tried to hold on. She gave another interview the following week, sitting in front of a bookcase lined with titles she probably hadn't read. She said she believed in second chances. That family should come first. But the audience didn't applaud this time. A journalist from a business magazine wrote an op-ed called "The Curse of the Golden Sibling." She detailed the rise of Samantha Callahan, the curated image, and the downfall that followed once the public saw who had been left behind. My inbox flooded. Investors, podcast invites, a network producer asking if I'd consider an interview. I declined them all. The story wasn't about me. Not really. It was about what happens when people pretend for too long that their cruelty is invisible. And now it wasn't. Late one evening, as the tide pressed against the shoreline like a steady breath, I sat outside with a glass of wine. The windows were open. The lights inside the house glowed softly, and the silence wasn't heavy anymore. A message arrived. It was from a former professor at Stanford. She wrote, "Congratulations. Some truths take time." I didn't reply. I just closed my laptop and leaned back. No fireworks. No revenge speech. Just gravity doing what it always does. Letting the weight settle exactly where it belongs. He reached out on a Tuesday morning. The email was brief. Just a suggestion to meet. No subject line, no greeting. Just a time, a place, and his name. I stared at it for longer than I'd like to admit. I hadn't heard his voice in nearly 3 years. Not since that dinner when he refilled Samantha's glass and asked me to clear the table in the same breath. Westwood. A cafe I used to walk past on my way to the library in college, back when I still thought effort could earn affection. I showed up early, picked a table outside beneath the faded green awning, ordered a plain coffee, and waited. I thought maybe he'd changed his mind, but at 1003 he appeared. Dress shirt tucked in, tie loosened. Hair more gray than I remembered. The kind of man who always looked slightly impatient with the world, as if he'd been forced to attend his own life. He spotted me, nodded once, and took the seat across. No hug, no handshake. Just a practiced smile and the line he probably rehearsed in the car. "You've done well for yourself." I didn't answer. I stirred my coffee slowly, watching the milk curl in. After a few seconds, he tried again. I saw the press around Lantern. Some kind of record-breaking acquisition, right? Still, I said nothing. The waitress came by and set down his espresso. He thanked her, then looked at me like I was a stranger who had once lived in his guest room. "I remember when you used to sketch logos in the margins of your textbooks," he said. I sipped. "So, did you bring me here for nostalgia?" He blinked, then leaned forward, his voice lowered as if we were co-conspirators. "I brought you here to remind you of something important, that your foundation matters. No matter how far you go." I tilted my head. Foundation? Yes. Family. The values we gave you. The opportunities. Discipline. Direction. I set my cup down. "You mean the way Mom told me to let Samantha shine because it was her moment? Or the time I got a full ride to that tech incubator in Chicago and no one showed up to the send-off?" He flinched slightly but covered it with a sip. "I don't want to argue, Nina. You never did. That was always the problem." His jaw tensed. He looked around as if embarrassed someone might overhear what he hadn't said aloud for decades. "I'm not your enemy," he said carefully. "You're not my anything," I replied. We sat there, two people who used to share a roof now sharing nothing but silence. He tried to find the thread again. "I know your sister's going through a difficult time. The board suspended her. And those sponsorships?" He sighed. "She could really use some support from you right now." My lips parted in disbelief. "You're joking. She's your sister. She's the one who said I wasn't." I reminded him. "You just agreed." He looked down at the table like it held a better version of this conversation. "You always had a chip on your shoulder," he muttered. "No," I corrected, "I had a hole in my chest. From trying to matter." His fingers tapped the side of his cup. "It wasn't intentional. Indifference rarely is," I said. We didn't speak for a long while after that. I watched a young couple at the next table laughing over shared pancakes, their hands casually brushing, no weight in the air between them. I wondered what that felt like. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the book. The cover was simple. Soft gray linen with silver lettering. "Building from the Silence." I slid it across the table. "What's this? A gift? Or a mirror?" Depending how you read it. He glanced at the title again, then turned it over. His brow furrowed at the author's initials. "NC," he looked at me. "You wrote this," I nodded. "It's an internal lantern publication, for our partners. And the interns. People who were told their voice didn't matter. Turns out it does." He held the book like it might burn him. "Why, give it to me." "Because I built something from nothing. From all the things you said weren't enough. I just thought you should see the blueprint." I stood before he could answer. Tossed a few bills on the table to cover our drinks. "Nina," he said quietly. I paused. "Are you happy?" It was the first real question he'd asked me in years. I turned back, met his eyes. "I'm whole." And I left. The parking lot shimmered in the sun. I slid into my car, hands resting on the wheel, and stared ahead as if the road might speak first. Back at the house, the waves crashed like clockwork. A soft rhythm against the shore that didn't care about apologies or titles or second chances. Later that night, when I checked the mail, I found a small envelope tucked beneath an ad circular. My name was scrawled in neat but slightly crooked cursive. Inside was a birthday card. A simple one. Balloons on the front. The kind you grab last minute at a gas station. "Happy birthday, Neva." He had misspelled my name. I stared at it for a moment. Not angry, not surprised. Just tired. I folded it shut, walked into my study, and opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. I placed the card under the title deed for the house. 2 signatures. One from a man who never saw me. And one from the woman I had become in spite of him. The letter arrived folded in a heavy cream envelope, my name written in cursive so familiar it felt like muscle memory. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. My mother's slant always leaned a bit too far to the right, like her words couldn't wait to rush past consequence. It came on a Thursday, tucked between a utilities bill and an invitation to a local gala I had no intention of attending. I carried it upstairs, still sealed, laid it on my kitchen counter, and stared at it while the kettle hissed behind me. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit for 3 days. Not because I was afraid of what it might say, but because I already knew. The rhythm of her justifications had never changed. Even when the notes were dressed up in paper nicer than anything I'd ever received on my birthdays growing up. On Sunday morning, I finally slid my finger under the flap. The letter was 5 pages long, written in blue ink on monogrammed stationery. I read it all in one sitting at the dining table, the ocean humming in the background through the open windows. She began with a story I had heard before, about how hard it had been in the early years, about sacrifices, about how she and my father had done their best with what they had. She spoke of tight budgets, lost opportunities, how everything had gone to Samantha's private school because she needed more support, more structure. How I had always been the strong one, the independent one. That word again. Independent. The elegant way to say overlooked. She wrote about the media attention. How hard it had been for the family to see their name tangled in public embarrassment. How confusing it was for my sister. How hurtful. Not once did she write the words "I'm sorry." Toward the end, she asked me to consider reconnecting. She said the house felt emptier now, that maybe it was time to rebuild what had been lost. She hoped I could look past everything and see the bigger picture. The bigger picture, I thought. The one where my face had always been cropped out. I placed the letter back in its envelope and set it beside my laptop. I didn't cry. There was nothing left in me to wring out. That evening, I pulled a fresh sheet of stationery from my drawer. Not embossed. Not scented. Just plain cream paper folded once. I didn't write 5 pages, just a few lines. There are some things that once thrown away cannot be folded back into place. But I'm okay. I don't need the perfect picture anymore. I just need the truth. I signed it with a soft pencil, the kind I used to use in art class. Underneath my name, I wrote Nina Callahan, owner, 9401 Ocean Drive, Malibu. I didn't seal it right away. I let it rest on my desk, the graphite catching light from the reading lamp. A small, quiet echo of a woman who had stopped asking for space and started claiming it. The next morning, I mailed it. At the post office, the clerk asked if I wanted tracking. I said no. Some things aren't meant to be traced. Only sent. When I returned home, I opened the windows wide. The sea breeze carried in a scent of salt and eucalyptus. I brewed coffee and sat at the edge of the deck barefoot, letting the sun stretch across my legs. The phone buzzed once that afternoon. A news alert. Samantha had removed her social media profiles. Her consulting firm's website had gone dark. A source close to the board said her application had been formally rejected. I didn't feel satisfaction. Only stillness. Later that week, I received a text from an unknown number. No words, just an old photo. Me at 16 painting in the garage. My hair pulled back, sleeves rolled to the elbows, focus stitched into my brow. I stared at it for a long time, wondering who had sent it. Wondering who still had it. Then I realized it didn't matter. That version of me, paint splattered and ignored, had grown into someone who didn't need permission to be seen. I printed the photo and slid it into a frame I had once bought for a family picture that never existed. It fit perfectly. That night, as I sat alone under the sky, stars pressing their faint glow against the darkness, I remembered something I once read. Maybe in a journal, maybe scribbled on the back of a receipt. Sometimes the apology never comes. But the peace does anyway. I held on to that. Quietly, firmly. And I let the silence be enough. The breeze that morning smelled like salt and lemon balm, the kind Tess grew in clay pots along the railing. I sat barefoot on the balcony, knees drawn to my chest, watching the tide pull back slowly from the shore like it had nothing left to prove. The sun rose, easy, stretching over the water like it remembered me. Downstairs, I heard the clink of her mug on the granite counter. Tess was reviewing documents at the kitchen island, glasses low on her nose, every bit the composed attorney she had always been, though her hair was up in a messy knot and she was wearing one of my old sweatshirts. She had flown in from Chicago 2 nights ago, suitcase still half-zipped in the guest room, offering her presence in quiet, consistent ways. She didn't ask questions, she never had to. That was the magic of Tess Whitmore. I sipped my coffee slowly and looked toward the far left of the house. The small room beside the staircase had been my studio now. White walls skylight above two windows that framed the ocean like moving portraits. It used to be a storage space when I bought the house. No one had wanted it. That's what made it perfect. I had named the scholarship after that room. Tess looked up at me from the table, then held up a page for my approval. I nodded. She smiled without a word and went back to her edits. The left of the stairwell fund would support young women in STEM who had been overlooked. Passed over. Told to quiet down or wait their turn. I didn't want their gratitude. I just wanted the system to stop mistaking silence for consent. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Julian. I haven't earned the right to say much, but I meant it when I said you were the best partner I ever had. I was too cowardly to admit it when it counted. I hope you're doing well. I stared at the words for a long while. Not because I didn't know how I felt, but because for the first time in years I didn't feel the need to answer. Not everything deserved a reply. I put the phone down and walked inside. The floor was cool beneath my feet. The house had started to feel like mine in a way no place ever had. Not just in deed or title, but in breath, in texture. I passed by the small studio and paused at the door. Light streamed through the window, catching dust in soft spirals. I stepped inside, closed the sliding glass quietly behind me, and took in the space. The desk still held the early drafts of my next book. The shelves lined with notebooks, palettes, books on architecture and oceans and forgotten cities. It didn't matter that no one had seen what I built during the years they erased me. I had seen it. I had lived it. That was enough. Outside, the gulls called out to each other, circling above the rocks. I watched them until they faded into the bright sky, then sat down at the desk and opened a blank page. There was still more to write. But not today. Today was for rest, for silence, for the girl who once hid behind bathroom doors during holidays, and the woman who now owned the entire view. I knew my family still talked. Whispered explanations to anyone who asked. I had heard through neighbors that my father had moved into a smaller apartment in Culver City, that my mother rarely left the house anymore, that Samantha had taken a leave from the public eye and was considering moving abroad. The echoes of their lives no longer reached me, and that was by choice. That evening, as Tess and I sat by the fire pit outside, wrapped in light blankets with wine in hand, I told her I was finally ready to let go of the last question. Why? She tilted her head, waiting. Why they chose her. Why they erased me. Why it took everything falling apart for them to notice. Tess nodded, then said softly, "Maybe the answer isn't for you. Maybe it never was." We didn't speak much after that. The waves kept time for us. The flames flickered low. The night stretched out wide and forgiving. I slept deeply that night. No dreams. No shadows creeping in. Just the ocean. And the quiet. If you've ever been pushed out of the place that was supposed to be your home, tell me. Would you build something new, or would you go back and knock on that same door again? I'd love to hear your story. And if you saw even a small part of yourself in mine, leave a like or drop a note. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the furthest.